Ferocious is a remarkable indie project, developed primarily by a single developer, Leo, from Omiag, which already brings an aura of considerable challenge and ambition to the game. It aims to revive the dinosaur game genre with intense first-person action, a classic theme reminiscent of cult franchises like Jurassic Park and Crisis. The dedication of a single creator gives the game a very personal identity, and this is rare today in a market dominated by large teams and huge budgets. The use of the Unity graphics engine, a choice that many consider limited for large games, is surprisingly maximized in Ferocious. Leo mentioned that Unity's flexibility gives him a lot of creative freedom, allowing him to shape the game the way he imagines, but at the same time, it forces him to be rigorous in optimization and choices to avoid technical limitations. This demonstrates a delicate balance between passion, technique, and pragmatism, which only a true enthusiast would do. The game's narrative context is interesting because it places the player on a mysterious and hostile island where not only dinosaurs, but mercenaries and even mechs appear to disrupt survival. The strong story of the protagonist, San, who tries to rescue his brother Mong while facing prehistoric and technological threats, adds an emotional aspect that elevates the game beyond pure action. This allows for a storytelling that can be engaging and more mature than expected from a dinosaur FPS. The game promises adaptive and intense gameplay, where the environment is an active and destructible element, evoking memories of the classic Crisis. This type of environmental interactivity is something that many fans expect in modern games, as it increases immersion and allows for varied strategies. The concept of controlling dinosaurs to turn the game against enemies is also exciting, adding a quite original tactical layer to the genre. The absence of early access or a demo, with the direct release of the full version, is a positive surprise, showing the developer and publisher Tiny Build's confidence in the final product. This may mean that the game had a more closed development process without the common public iterations of today, ensuring a more polished experience from the player's first contact. Personally, what stands out most is the effort to combine nostalgia and innovation. Ferocious is among those titles that seem to want to bring back that sense of adventure and danger that games like Dino Crisis and the first Far Cry delivered, but with a modern take on the visuals, setting, and gameplay. For those who, like me, grew up playing these classics, there is a promise of reliving that adrenaline with a contemporary touch, which is quite exciting. Overall, Ferocious seems like a game born from the love of a forgotten genre and the desire to offer an immersive and robust experience, even with limited team resources. This combination of indie ambition, surprising technical engine, and a personal narrative makes me quite curious and excited to see if the game delivers everything it has been promising so far. It's worth following and giving it a chance, especially for FPS and dinosaur fans looking for something fresh and authentic. The story of Ferocious, from what has been revealed and experienced in the demo, seems to me like one of those plots that strongly bets on the classic combination of man versus nature, but with a touch of mystery and constant threat that holds attention, even with its still somewhat raw development. The narrative begins with you stranded on an island full of dinosaurs and mercenaries, which already creates a tense premise full of potential for intense conflicts between greedy humans and the wild nature that struggles to survive. This contrast is the soul of the game and what gives an interesting layer to the story, despite some elements seeming cliché or predictable for those who follow games and films of this genre. One point that caught my attention in the demo is the feeling of exploring a living environment, where the story is not only told through cutscenes, but also through the interactions and presence of these dinosaurs that are not just enemies, but can also be allies. The possibility of using a device that allows you to communicate with the dinosaurs and even fight alongside them gives a cool differential to the narrative. This feature makes the game less predictable and opens space for emotional connections, especially with a T-Rex cub that appears in the adventure, bringing a more human and sentimental side to the survival plot. The delivery of the story in the demo, with several living and exploratory parts, makes me passionate about the frightening and mysterious atmosphere of the island. However, the execution of the plot suffers a bit in terms of fluidity, with some dialogues and events that sound somewhat derivative, the kind of thing that works but doesn't surprise. The plot has its cool moments, but seems to be rushing to establish the setting more than deepening characters or revealing truly impactful secrets. It seems to me that the plot would seek more the sensation of discovery and tension than being a deeply original story. Another point I felt was that the mix of genres brought games like Far Cry and Crysis to mind, which is a good sign that Ferocious tries to balance between frantic action, exploration, and survival in an open world. The demo makes it clear that the narrative is not just about escaping the island, but about understanding what happened there, who the real villains are, and what is at stake for the balance between humanity and nature. This more conspiratorial and scientific layer with sinister megacorporations involved promises to mix the thriller and action genres well. On the other hand, what really caught me were some technical flaws and the somewhat clumsy narrative that inevitably make me hope that the next versions of the game will improve the story delivery, making the dialogues more natural and the characters' motivations deeper. The potential is there, mainly due to the setting and the concept of facing humans and dinosaurs on opposite sides, but at this moment in the demo, I felt that it still lacks that robust emotional impact that makes a story unforgettable. There is something in the game that reminds me of unpredictable encounters in nature, where survival depends on cunning and adaptation, and I think this is one of the coolest parts of the theme. The plot, despite its imperfections, creates a palpable tension and a sense of urgency that motivates me to want to explore more and understand how far this conflict unfolds. The old-fashioned survival side mixed with a hint of science fiction gives an original face to the game, which, even if it's not perfect, conveys this vibe of constant challenge that I really enjoy. Based on what I played in the demo, I believe that the story of Ferocious still has a lot of room to develop and surprise. It has a strong base, but needs more polishing to be able to hold the player beyond the gameplay. The balance between action, survival, and relationship with the dinosaurs is what can transform the game into a memorable experience, and I'm excited to see how this will evolve until the full release, which is scheduled to start in early December 2025, with great potential to grow in the near future. Ferocious shows an ambitious proposal, mixing elements of survival, first-person shooting, and a setting that is very reminiscent of Indiana Jones with dinosaurs in the style of Turok. The exploration of the open areas is cool, with large maps that encourage walking and discovering different corners, which brings a touch of adventure that is very cool and atmospheric. Visually, the game is very impressive, with graphics that hold up well the prehistoric theme and the wild nature of the island, which helps to immerse yourself in the tense atmosphere of this universe. On the other hand, the gameplay still seems somewhat rude and raw for a final release. The weapon cleaning mechanic, for example, which degrades quickly and needs mushrooms to keep the weaponry functional, has become more of a nuisance than a strategic addition. This generates frustration, because it doesn't add emotion to survival, just extra work that disrupts the rhythm of combat. The combat itself leaves something to be desired in polishing. The shooting feedback is not satisfactory, the sound of the weapons is somewhat lifeless, and the artificial intelligence of the enemies is quite basic, which breaks the immersion in critical moments of action. About the dinosaurs, which are the great appeal of the game, they appear little and do not seem as threatening as expected. The lack of well-made animations and the absence of a strong sound impact make the combat against these creatures not convey the tension it should. It's disappointing, as the promise of facing ferocious dinosaurs doesn't seem to be delivered in the demo yet. In the aspect of movement and environmental interaction, the game needs refinement. Some controls give a somewhat clumsy feeling, which can discourage those who like more fluid and responsive action. Even the part of picking up items or using the inventory is a bit confusing, with movements that are too fast that don't seem natural for the character. This contributes to a fragmented experience where immersion is always threatened. On the other hand, Ferocious has very interesting things, such as the possibility of dismembering enemies and the consequences of this in combat, which is rare and brings a differential. The visual damage to creatures and humans is a detail that excites, especially for those who enjoy more brutal and realistic games in the gore style. This type of detail shows that the game has identity and can stand out if polished. Ferocious was quite raw at the time I played the demo. It seemed to be in an alpha state, with many bugs and polishing issues that make it difficult to evaluate the gameplay very positively. However, its potential is great thanks to the environment, art, and some central mechanics that already show personality. If the studio manages to improve the gameplay, artificial intelligence, and the impact on the action, the game can become a differentiated and fun survival FPS. For now, for those who enjoy survival games with dinosaurs, the demo is a good sample of what may come, but it doesn't deliver a complete or solid enough experience to leave someone fully satisfied with the gameplay. The expectation remains to see what will come in the final versions. The graphics of Ferocious impressed me right away with the realism and dense atmosphere they managed to create. The setting of the island, with detailed vegetation and lighting that varies between clearer and darker moments, brings an almost cinematic feeling, a vibe that is very reminiscent of scenes from films like Jurassic Park. The use of Unity is surprising, because the game manages to run smoothly and at the same time deliver a visual that seems more elaborate than many indie games that use the engine. Playing the demo, I realized that the detailing of the 3D models, both of the humans and the dinosaurs, is striking. It's not something that has reached the ultra-realistic level of the big AAA, but the texture of the skins, the movement of the creatures, and the way the light reflects on the materials convey a very convincing sense of dangerous wildlife. However, in some moments, there is still variation in the quality of the assets, such as plants that cross objects or textures that are a little blown out at certain distances. The effect of dynamic lighting and shadows is one of the highlights. In the more closed scenarios, in the dense forest, the filtered light creates a very immersive play of light and dark, which contributes to the tension and suspense. This made me want to explore the island more, even with the bugs in the demo. Some scenes in 4K that I saw on YouTube almost reach cinematic levels, with particle and climate effects that are almost palpable, which is rare for a solo indie game. On the other hand, the demo still reveals that the game is in a stage of refinement. There are instabilities, frame drops in some situations, and some animations and graphic details that break the immersion a little. For example, the irregular movement of the rope when rappelling, and visual elements that seem out of place, such as some bugs in the textures during the movement. This is not a serious problem, but it affects the ideal visual experience that the game tries to convey. In my opinion, what Ferocious is trying to do visually is to mix the feeling of a tense action game, Far Cry style, with the prehistoric and threatening atmosphere of the dinosaurs, and this has been working in the graphic part. Despite the current technical limitations, the visual concept is promising, with a combination of lush natural environments and threatening design of the creatures, creating a unique balance between beauty and danger. For fans of games with dinos, Ferocious brings a visual that helps a lot to enter this wild universe, showing that it's possible to bring new life to the genre with a modern approach, even with budgetary limitations and being an indie project. The demo doesn't deliver everything perfectly, but I see potential for the graphics to evolve into something more consistent and spectacular in the final version. Ferocious already shows a good graphic path with an immersive atmosphere and visual effects that work to create tension and interest, although it needs more polishing to correct bugs and inconsistencies. The demo left me wanting to see how this will evolve in the complete game, mainly because of the mix of nature, dinosaurs, and action that the visual promises to deliver well. Ferocious is a game that promises an intense experience of survival and combat against dinosaurs, which already creates a high expectation for those who enjoy this vibe of games like Turok and Far Cry with a Jurassic touch. The demo delivers impressive visuals for an indie game with well-detailed environments and an atmosphere that really conveys the feeling of constant danger on the island. This setting is one of the strongest points I've seen so far, creating an immersion that keeps you alert throughout the gameplay. However, the game's performance still seems somewhat irregular, especially with regard to bugs and frame rate drops, which ends up hurting this immersion a little. In intense battles, including confrontations with several dinosaurs and human enemies, it is possible to notice some freezes and stutters that take away some of the fluidity. This is not uncommon for a game in pre-release, but it makes the experience more frustrating than it should be. The controls also lost points in my initial impression. The response seems a bit stuck, and the movements are not as fluid as I expected, giving that feeling of playing something still in alpha phase. In addition, the visual feedback after killing enemies, especially the dinosaurs, is kind of strange. Often it doesn't even seem like you're sure if you manage to shoot down the target, which breaks the rhythm of the action a little. One point that caught my attention was the artificial intelligence, which doesn't always behave convincingly. The dinosaurs, despite being threatening in design, sometimes don't seem to hunt or react to the player in the most realistic way. This hurts the challenge and makes the tension drop in certain moments, since the danger is not as constant as expected. Another aspect that I liked is the survival system, with crafting and exploration of the environment to survive, which brings an interesting dynamic and requires strategic thinking. The idea of being able to communicate and even fight alongside the dinosaurs creates an extra layer of involvement, giving the game a unique identity different from other survival shooters. Despite the negative points in the demo, I feel that Ferocious has enormous potential. The concept is strong, the atmosphere is incredible, and with adjustments in performance, controls, and polishing in the gameplay, it can become a very cool game for those who enjoy this mix of survival and action with dinosaurs. For those who like this type of game, it's worth keeping an eye on the evolution of the title until the release. Overall, my experience with the demo was a mix of excitement and frustration. If it manages to overcome the technical aspects and improve the polishing, Ferocious has everything to be one of the pleasant surprises of the year in the genre of survival games with dinosaurs. Ferocious is that typical game that makes you want to pick it up at launch, but at the same time screams, calm down, let me breathe a few patches first. From the demo and what has been shown, the feeling is of a very stylish dinosaur FPS, with a Lost Island vibe and a very promising base, but still with several technical and polishing edges that can weigh on those who don't like being a disguised beta tester. Speaking of the positive part first, visually the game is absurdly beautiful for an indie project, with dense forest, water, lighting, and that Far Cry with Turok vibe that catches the eye right away. The demo conveys very well this feeling of being really trapped on a dangerous island, with mercenaries, dinosaurs, and a nature that seems alive, which is perfect for those who like more atmospheric FPS than just shooting arena. Just the fact of exploring this type of scenario already gives that desire to rummage through every corner. In terms of game fantasy, controlling dinosaurs with the communication device is the great charm, and that's where Ferocious stands out. The idea of scanning creatures, giving commands, and even fighting alongside them against a mercenary corporation gives a different flavor to the traditional FPS, especially for those who are already tired of just shooting at humans all the time. If this system is expanded in the final version, it looks like a game that becomes a niche favorite precisely because it delivers something that almost no other FPS delivers today. Now, looking through the head of someone who played the demo, you can feel that the game is still somewhat raw in some important things. I found the controls a bit heavy, weird AI, and that feeling that the game is beautiful but hasn't completely fit in rhythm, feedback, and balance of encounters. There is also the expectation of dinosaur game, and in the demo, not everyone was satisfied with the quantity and presence of them. So there is a risk of hype greater than the delivery for those who are waiting for action with Dino all the time. Therefore, the answer about buying at launch or waiting depends a lot on your profile. If you like to be among the first to explore a different FPS, don't care so much about bugs, balancing adjustments, and possible performance problems, and just entering this island and playing with dinos is worth the entry price. Ferocious seems like a good candidate for purchase at launch, even because it doesn't come with a AAA full price. It's that type of game that, if you like to support new ideas and small studios, it makes sense to pick it up early and follow the evolution. Now, if you are more picky with polishing, want a well-rounded campaign, competent AI, and well-tied systems, the best decision is to wait a few months. With so much feedback from the demo, it's very likely that the game will receive important patches, adjustments in combat, performance improvements, and maybe even extra content, and then you enter already in a more stable version, possibly even on sale in the big PC sales. For this type of player, buying day one usually brings more frustration than pleasure. In the end, Ferocious today seems indicated mainly for three audiences. Fans of cinematic solo FPS like Far Cry, who want something more strange indie with dinosaur. Those who love the theme of Lost Island, prehistoric, and buy the game just for the atmosphere. And players who enjoy testing demos, giving feedback, and following the evolution of a smaller project. If you fit in there and already like the vibe of the demo, you can go for the launch aware that it's not a polished AAA. If you are looking for something more closed, well-rounded, and without headaches, this is that perfect game to put on the wish list, follow the updates, and jump in only after the first patches and community reviews.